Our second storyteller, Chloe, is an author, a phenomenal storyteller, a dear friend of mine, whose writing is driven by identity and healing.
And in Chloe's story, she shares reflections on accessing our imagination by making altars of our bodies.
I remember having questions about my body when I was a child, about its affinity, its curves, its wonder. Questions I never asked and no one offered. For curious minds of young girls who want to know to whom and to where they belong, for every question left unanswered to multiply. Those questions were mine to imagine on my own. My first impression of my body was made by Gael's tongue down my throat. It was a strong muscle. He pressed his lips against mine, softly at first, then with pressure. Too much. As he leaned in, my back curved against the basketball bleachers. The metal pierced the back of my spine, its cold distracting me from what I had imagined would be a perfect first kiss, while his tongue invaded my mouth with intrusion. His 16-year-old hands reached up my shirt, tempted to see how far I would let them crawl up my 12-year-old breasts. After pushing them down and away, my first boyfriend broke up with me the very next day. I hadn't given him my body the way he'd wanted, and so he didn't need it anymore. Gael taught me to go numb if I wanted to be wanted, and so I did. And so the story goes of my body and I. The next-door neighbor boasted that he'd kissed me when he never did. My crush grabbed my booty when I told him no. My friend's older brother gave me wedgies in the water, in the pool. Another friend's older cousin adored ripe flavors. Fruit the color of red bone, baby, shorty, and sweetheart. Bruises on my thighs left by a lover made examples out of me. Skinny joints and Long Islands in red plastic cups made disassociation a second wind. And smiles disguised my body's longing, making secrets of the living and dying in my womb. In boardrooms, I'd lose my voice, and at parties, I'd stay close to the door. White beards on white men brushed the back of my neck on elevators, reminding me they were there just because they could. When I was nervous, I got cold, and when I was uncomfortable, I lost track of my wisdom. Life bears holes in our bodies' stories of what it means to know and love ourselves. I hadn't realized how out of my vessel I lived. My questions continued. I wondered how much had I departed from my own body, and what dreams did I have that were never realized? What dreams had I never dared to have? What was my imagination capable of had it not been interrupted? How do you access imagination when your body is tethered to its deep sea of memory? How can you levitate when realities dilute the subconscious that is your connection to imagination? And what did I need to ground my spirit back into my body? Girl, why are you always in your head like that? You better get in your body. Homegirl, pass me the J. When she exhaled, I too released. I could tell her chest was heavy, weight anchored from the years she said she was okay when she wasn't. The slow leak of repressed numbness flowed like a tap once we let it. Catharsis brought me back home. The other day, we laid out among the trees and the deep foliage, me and homegirl and women I found and who found us. It's a romantic thing, you know, to co-create a perfect moment, even if it lasts just for a perfect moment. To live somewhere between the ancestors we never met and the future we can only imagine. And we did. We imagined our bodies as homes for love, where our heads fell into themselves with laughter and shoulders leaned on each other, weak from our throbbing joy, where every limb sprouting from our hips and chest has its own story of glory and reverence, where our senses are activated, alive, and crackling with the leaves, stretched and tall, and everything we see and experience is our art. We pass J's and speak truths through smoke rising and slow dancing above us, and exchange histories of who we once were and affirm to be. We microdose on our liberation. We imagine our body's freedom into existence, free enough to reclaim how they are moved and used, how they fall in safe sheets, in safe arms, wrapped in safe kisses by lovers who love us back, by children who will never let us go. Free enough to drop into the place where our warm thighs meet our creations. Our bodies birth babies, and life and our breasts are not for the taking, not on cold bleachers nor behind closed doors. They are ours, reserved for the children who will grow to be heroes yet to be archived, and for the lovers who know how to love them, and who know what they're doing when they do. This love, this imagining is otherworldly. It is spiritually regenerative. It is hydrating. It is conscious. And it begins in this body. Thank you.
Okay. All right, Chloe, thank you so much for joining us in this after the release craft interview. We absolutely loved your story. We know so many people have questions about what they just heard, as do we. And G is going to kick us off with the first question.
Yeah. So, Chloe, we're curious how you identify creatively. Do you call yourself a writer, a storyteller, an artist, and why?
Yeah, I think I call myself a creative and I call myself a writer. Writing as like the craft, the form, um, like the vehicle for expression, and I think creative as just someone who expresses
Mm. Mm-hmm.
in in art form and in just the way I interpret and build relationship with life. Yeah.
I'm curious as to, because we've talked to a handful of people now from the Release One cohort, and I'm curious if you've ever struggled with putting that title on yourself, that writer, that creator, because a lot of folks talked about imposter syndrome and wanting to
Mm-hmm.
have something done before calling themselves that thing.
Yeah. I mean, yes, I would echo what they said. I think even as a writer, and I've authored a book, I don't think I qualified myself to even call myself a writer until I authored the book.
Mm.
And even after authoring one book, I'm not, I'm like, I released a book, but I'm not an author careerist. And so it's like,
Mm.
even in um, kind of like achieving one thing, the bar is always raised. It's something that I don't know that I'll ever fully claim. And a big part of that is imposter syndrome. Um, a big part of it too, like I actually enjoy the pursuit.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I mean, I like continuously challenging myself creatively. I don't think imposter syndrome is healthy. But I do enjoy, and it's part of the reason I wanted to do this. I enjoy stepping out of my comfort zone and doing things that I otherwise feel unqualified to do. I enjoy the challenge of uncomfortability creatively. And yeah, it just leads to just more expansion. And once you unlock one, then you keep unlocking and you keep unlocking. And I like that kind of journey I'm going on um, with my own kind of creative identity and creative exposure. In terms of like calling myself a creative, I think for sure, it took me a while to even embrace that very general label. And I think
Mhm.
a lot of us suffer as shadow artists. If you've read The Artist's Way, it was kind of like my Bible to like starting the unlocking in just like recognizing how far back my suppression of creativity started, and like really I can say now, having really like self-examined and gone through that book and just continue to like uproot why I have imposter syndrome, I can identify very specifically from like 7 years old, and then something else, another milestone of like my creative journey, like in high school and then in early 20s. And now I feel like I understand and give grace to where the imposter syndrome comes from. Um, and I can also like quiet it, knowing
Mhm.
that not based on qualification, it's based on feeling like I needed to be a shadow artist because of, environments that didn't bring that out of me. And so I feel, after having done craft and release, I feel like I can say
Let's go.
I feel like I am really leaning more than ever into my artistry, and knowing that it doesn't come in like one format. I think I've always defaulted to being a writer because as a like extreme introvert growing up, like I literally couldn't access like my throat chakra to
Yeah.
say the things. And so, you know, in writing, it's just, to me it's one of the most sacred art forms because it's just you and the paper, and you can have an audience to that or you could not. But even without the audience, you could still be a writer, you know, um, and get to know yourself like deeper through the writing practice. Um, so yeah, I hope that answers the question, but I appreciate this like ongoing journey with my creativity and what crafts they lend to. Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Very relatable. Um,
Okay.
yeah, and we'll get into this a little bit more as we talk about your piece more specifically. But another question we have is around voice. And it's very interesting in
Mm.
this piece in particular, just as we think about like silence and expression. How have you come to cultivate your voice on the page? What do you think it sounds like? Does it sound very true to your speaking voice, your everyday voice? Is it closer to a voice that's in your
Mm.
head? Is it somewhere in between?
Love that question. That's a good one. That's a good one because in my closest relationships, or just, friendships that I cultivate, I do have a I do have a different voice. And it's like the voice that is like, girl, stop, bitch, stop. That's my voice, you know?
Right.
But um but I do think that part of the beauty of my writing voice is it's like accessing a poetic interpretation of life. And part of it, and poetic and romantic,
Mhm.
and um it just allows me to access my imagination in a way that um I experience in my most introverted self, where I'm in touch with the world in different ways than the world as an observer, in a different way than I am in touch with connection with people in the
Mhm.
way I use that word. And so it's like, even in that piece that I wrote, it's like the crackling of the leaves, and it's just like observing the smallest things that bring you joy, or the smallest things that trigger you, or like I feel like through writing I'm able to just form an intimacy with it, with the world, with the experiences, with the things that like touch and move me, and almost paint this um, romantic like dance with life.
Mm.
Um, yeah,
Yeah. It
and
sounds like
I
a slowing down, maybe even.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I yeah, I do think like I'm a simple pleasures person.
Hmm.
Um, and so I like exercising this like slower, softer voice that embraces the simple pleasures, like takes full note of the ugly, where the ugly shows up,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and um, and is able to like articulate it to such a fine point in a way that in conversation, we can be like, girl,
Right.
ain't shit.
Right. A
Exactly.
lot more
Exactly.
flippant. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Yes,
And
and almost dismissive of how
Yeah.
I'm actually experiencing it when
yes.
I'm by myself, with my
Hmm.
tears, with my doubts, with the mirror, with my loneliness or imposter syndrome, or my hope that I'm
Yeah.
too shy to share that I have, like aspirationally. Um, and so it's almost like writing um, preserves the intimacy that I have with the world and with like lived experience, in a way that, outwardly, once you take it outwardly, there's so many other things to consider that shape your voice.
Yes.
There's shame, there's perception, there's, interpretation, there's ego, like those sorts of things. And I appreciate my writing voice because it's honest without those other layers.
Hmm.
And that is a perfect segue into the next question that we have for you. But also, like as a friend and a fan of your work, I think that there is just a softness. There's an
Mm-hmm.
observation in your book, even Life I Swear, shameless plug,
Mm-hmm.
phenomenal pickup. Uh, there's a power in
Mm-hmm.
the softness as well. Like I just think that there's I don't know, like you can't snap a soft thing. I think that Bruce Lee said
Mm-hmm.
that of like I
Yeah.
think that you can feel that in your
Mm-hmm.
writing. And also
Yeah.
I think in you releasing hearing you speak about it is just another layer of strength. I think
Mm-hmm.
watching you exhibit. So the question, because there is so much honesty, and I think that's what really drew me to your work as well, of where you go places. And I know we've talked about this intimately, of where you're like, there's not a question I won't answer. You're like,
Mm-hmm.
I may not have all the answers, but and when I'm doing this book tour, when I'm doing all these things, there's not a question I won't answer. So what is the function of honesty in your work?
Mm. Oh, these questions are so good. The function of honesty, I think, um, I just, the function of honesty, I think it's a responsibility to my growth as a like human existing in the world. I think it's a responsibility to my growth. I think I have had seasons of life where I wasn't honest with myself about how something felt or how I experienced it. And so, in not being on, there's so many ripple effects of not being honest with yourself. Like, then you're not honest with other people. Then you're not living authentically. Then, if you can't live authentically, you can't really name the thing that you want and you need and you desire. And I think, I I want those things. I want the things I want and need and desire. I can't even access them if I'm not first honest with myself so that I can be honest with the people around me. It's a work in progress. I think for the same reason I say there's not a question I won't answer is the same reason I might accept an invitation to do craft and release, because I might be scared of the question and I'm like, what are you going to ask? What are you going to ask? But I'm pushing myself to answer it anyway. And I'm pushing myself to share a piece anyway. And what that does for me, which I think like the most uncomfortable part of honesty, is that it forces you into your body. Speaking of the body, it forces you into your body, and it forces you to really like if you have the relationship with your body that I am trying to cultivate, you can feel your nerves like sparking from
Racing.
Yes.
you can feel your heartbeat. You can feel the thumping. You can feel I feel myself get cold. I feel myself stiffen up. I feel when I feel safe, I feel literally like my muscles relax. And I think I mentioned this even when I shared the photos and all. Like, it is the most human reminder that we are alive.
Mm-hmm.
And for having gone through seasons of not being honest with myself, we we coast on numbness, right? And then then time goes by and you're like, how the hell did I end up here? And that because we weren't like acutely aware of every single movement we were making in our uncomfortability. And so we allow things that aren't for us to just like move, push, thrust us into places in our lives or environments or communities that aren't for us. Honesty is the only way we can avoid misalignment. And so it's a responsibility for me to be honest in my work and in life, which I think I'm actually better at it in my creative work than I am in my real life, to be honest. And so that's why it's like I need the creative outlet to be able to breathe that out, to be able to release. I need the creative outlet because I do know in parts of my other like living life, like I do have imposter syndrome. I do not always name my needs. I have had a pattern of like feeling small when I'm actually qualified to feel big and take up space. And any creative work I do, it's not an alter ego because it is me, but it is just this I'm just way more unapologetic about my honesty than any other space that I occupy. And part of it too is me, the softness and the power that you mentioned is like speaking that power into myself so that it manifests like into my body and I can carry that through in other ways. And so my creativity is a vessel for my power. It's a place where I like meet my power face to face, and like we like
Right. We in the thing.
yeah, like, and that's really the safest place for me to do that, to meet my power. I don't meet my power. It just takes a lot more for me to meet my power in corporate spaces or when I was younger in relationships. And so my creativity is where I know I have access to my power there. I
Mm.
know I do. And even if I'm speaking, I'm the one that's like having to like, I'm thrusting myself into power through honesty and uncomfortability creatively.
Ooh,
Yes.
wee.
Oh, wow. It sounds like honesty is essential in everything you write. I'm curious what else you think is essential to a good story? Like, what is the anatomy
Mm,
of a good story?
mm. Um, you know, I think there's like seasoned professional storytellers, that will always talk about the arc of the storytelling, the tension, the like power of persuasion or the art of persuasion. There's all that. And I was gonna say vulnerability, but I think that goes hand in hand with honesty. Um, but to me, the vulnerability, there's honesty in a way that is, I said what I said and that's what I meant, and I'm honest about it and unapologetic about it. The vulnerability, which is like a tentacle of honesty, is um, I'm exposed.
Mm.
I'm exposed. And I think that's what I did in my book in the most like naked way. Um, and I try and bring that into my writing. Um, I find myself drawn to other people's storytelling when they are exposed because it makes me immediately respect it, appreciate it, and then what happened? Like and then what happened? How did people perceive it? How did people judge it? I think too, like I'm gonna bring up responsibility to vulnerability as well in the way I want to show up as a creative being. I just want to um, let people. There's such a trepidation about vulnerability. If I share this or expose this, then are they gonna love me? Are they gonna judge me? They're gonna, box me, label me. And I think I want to create work that is an example of no matter how vulnerable you are, there's love on the other side. Because we're not always assured of that in real life, nor in creativity. And so I want more creative spirits and beings and people to feel assured of that, and they can't if they don't have examples of it. Not that I'm the only example by no means, but I want to add to a tapestry of like uh, an example of there's love on the other side of vulnerability.
Mm.
Because the
Mm.
things that we're most vulnerable about are the things usually that people have told us time and time again you're not worthy because of them. Um, but I just feel very um, embraced by a community of other creatives and readers and um, I guess just spirit led people who just like grace is so central to how we connect. And so I just want to
Yes.
be part of that community. And you can't access it if you don't lead with your own vulnerability. Yeah. I want that to be um, just, I guess, more normalized in like the ecosystem of creative work. So yeah.
Oh, it's. I think you're leading the way in a lot of ways. I think just if in your own world, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because there is a lot of faux vulnerability. I think even especially digitally, it's
Mm-hmm.
like we just see. I think that space to where you're getting up and you're sharing this thing and it's landing on people and it's landing in their bodies. That's not something that we get to experience a lot, right?
Mm,
Like you can look at a beautiful photo or carousel and somebody's telling you they had a hard time. It's different than hearing you say
mhm.
like I got to get back in my body to a body of people, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
So I think that is an extremely powerful addition to the anatomy of a good story.
Mm, yeah. I
We
agree.
have one more burning craft question for you before we
Yeah.
get into our personal questions. And it is, what is your practice? What's your current writing practice looking like? I'm curious, or writing or creative practice. It doesn't have to
Yeah.
be specific to writing at all.
Um, well, one, I saw you post about morning pages, and I was like, yes, morning pages. So I do morning pages, and I find like there's such blockage with like the clutter that we wake up with. And so I just want to like, you know, tear down the blockage, um, and just vomit onto the page. I also find, and I've really been inspired. If I could like shout out a good friend, Carmen Harris, who has, and Imani Samuels. But I have really been inspired about this idea of like accessing imagination through
Mhm.
dreaming literally like in brainstorming creatively and dreaming up big visions, but also like the morning pages are like anything that has existed in my subconscious. I want to like bring it to the surface. Um, I, my process. Hmm. I journal a lot. I journal a lot because I feel like I can't, even in my feelings, I can't take the first thought or reaction at face value. I kind of have to
Mm.
like, I kind of have to like do some tilling to like the earth to really get to the root and pull that up. So that's been really consistent in my practice. Um, I think a big part of my practice um, is listening, listening, observing. I think just as I consider I like to be like of this world. I like the I guess the dance of like being rooted in this world and rooted in my body and rooted in like here and present. I also consider myself like a deep observer, and I like also being like just watching. Um and I think in watching um I read people, I read situations, and then later interpret it for myself. I don't if that makes sense. So
100%.
yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
No,
yeah,
I think the observational practice is
yeah,
an extremely important one, and
yeah.
one that more people can take into account.
No,
I
but it's
mean,
true. Yeah.
It
it
is.
makes you more in touch with like part of artistry is living or
Exactly.
like being in life or seeing life, experiencing life, observing life, and then like reporting back to your page or your canvas or whatever, like what you saw and experienced, heard, felt. Um, and then part of it is like self awareness.
Mhm.
Observation is good for self awareness. So
Yeah. It's like you're out in the fields. That's the work, you know? And it's
Field
like,
work.
how do you write great characters if you're not really observing people? Um,
hmm
or as you mentioned earlier, Chloe, like that slower pace, that romance, you have to watch the wind blow through the
hmm
trees or just
yeah,
take note of all of the little things. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
Wonderful. Kind
hmm
of to that point, one of the first questions that I have for you. So Nika and I, we've wrapped our core questions, and now we're getting into
Yes.
these like very specific questions that we want to ask you about the piece. Um, the opening scene with Gael, the physicality in that is so ripe. It made my body like tense up. And I think in part because it's such a relatable encounter. But you're also doing so much with language in that section to really put the listener in your body. You have lines like tongue down throat, metal piercing spine, his tongue explored my mouth with intrusion. All of that just makes us feel it, the
Oh yeah, I
discomfort.
just felt it. Yeah,
Yeah,
hearing you
yeah.
read it.
Um, I'm curious about the craft in writing that, was like the choices that you made when you did that, and even kind of how it felt to recount that encounter in
Mm,
that way.
yeah. I've never written about that. Never, I don't even think I talked about it or told anybody about it. So I appreciate the opportunity to like revisit that. And when, okay, theme is body. I was like, I wrote just a dump of like what have been my experiences with body. It's such a all encompassing theme. There's so many ways to go about it, and so I wanted to go back with what was the first time I felt I was just aware of my body doing a thing that was uncomfortable, and that was it. And I think I never told anybody about it because I think as a little girl, there's shame around the rejection. There's shame around even as like an adult. Like I was 12, he was 16. That's what you call a fast ass. You know what I mean? And so I'd never talked about it. And that was, I think, when I think back on my life in those early years of it, that was definitely the first of similar situations like that as a girl who was um, pushed into something because it looked like it's something I wanted, but I didn't know how to navigate it. I didn't know how to say I didn't know how to navigate it. I didn't know how to vocalize saying no or stop. You know, I did with like the pushing down in a way of his hand. But I think so many girls are unknowingly violated. I wouldn't have said that, that's a violation at that age at all. Um, and there's just such a tenderness of that age of like wanting to just be liked, let alone loved. Like, I just want to be liked, you know? I wanted to be liked. And I think part of wanting to be liked is it, you want to like yourself. It gives you a reason to like yourself. Um, and when someone shows you that they don't actually really like you like that, like they like you for one thing, but they don't like you, then it just creates this spiral of like projecting it back onto yourself of like, what is my worth? What is the the things, we often do. It's just those experiences are such a reflection of like how we choose to engage with ourselves and then with other people. And so I appreciate the exercise of like going back, like when did it start, which is like the same thing of like when did I become a shadow artist, and like really being really specific, because I'm like, dang, like I've had men issues since I was 12 or even younger, and like, but the grace of like, girl, I just want to talk to her and be like, girl, come over here, it's good, you're good. So I think your question was like, what was the experience like of revisiting that? It was really like, and now as a mother of a 7-year-old who acts 12, um, I am just so much more aware of like these young, ripe, like humans and how they absorb every single thing, and it has like tenfold effect on how they develop, how they form meaningful relationships or define them, how what their relationship with themselves is. So I think that was a good time to revisit that in my journey of like motherhood too.
Yes,
Yeah,
Absolutely.
for sure.
yeah.
And I actually had, we had Glenn and I had quite a few powwows after the release. So we had, we had a few
I
powwows,
bet.
and some planned, some unplanned. But I had some friends flew out from Michigan, and we were kind of having this like backyard patio session and going over the show and what stories stood out to them the most. And one of my family friends, shout out to Brianna, named yours off top. She was like,
Mm.
my number one. She was like, number one, Chloe. And she said that hearing you say things like getting back into my body put a phrase to something that she's felt her entire life.
Mm.
And
Hmm.
I'm curious as to what present day practices do you utilize to get back into your body? Because I
Mm.
think we oftentimes hear a story and we're like, oh, the person's past that. You know,
Right.
when I'm, when I'm storytelling, I'm like, this is a process of even getting past it, right?
Mm.
But it's something that lives within us, and it's an obstacle or a mountain that we always have to scale. It may become a shorter mountain, but it's always an internal mountain. So,
Mm-hmm.
are there current practices that you utilize to get back in your body, and what are they?
Yeah. I I I meditate sporadically. I walk religiously. I have um developed so I don't know what other questions are coming, but I want to like jump I might jump into an
Jump
answer.
around.
Go.
But I have also been exploring cannabis as a practice for self-healing, right? And I mentioned this in the story a little bit. I just like sprinkle it in there. If you caught it, you caught it. If you didn't, you didn't. And I've never talked about it. So this is a premiere conversation we're having. um, and my relationship with it has definitely evolved over the years. Gael happened at 12. I started smoking at 11.
Wow.
So yeah, so it's been in my life, but it's been in my life as a door for escapism for a long time. But recently in like the last 5 years or something like that, 3 to 5 years, I have been using it as a tool for getting in touch with my body because sometimes we are in our head, which also came up in the piece, right? And um, it's just been interesting to like access different senses with it. Eating, meditating. Girl, the other day I discovered going through the drive-through car wash with the heat, this heat on
I
the
bet that's
seats on,
nuts.
the heat on the seats on, leaned back, the colors, and I'm just saying, like, just experiencing like life moments in different ways. And so I've just had this like openness and to just trying it in, and I'm not usually I use it as a sleep aid. I'm not a like get high and walk around the
Hmm.
world. But I met about a year ago this like kindred spirit of a woman, black woman named Stephanie, and she gathers other black women, and we talk, we have like structured conversations about certain things while we indulge, right? And she introduced me to forest bathing,
Mm.
with like intersected with cannabis. And so, um, which also it actually inspired the piece. And so there's a group of ten women. Um, we go into the forest, the woods, and we found this like beautiful serene spot. The trees were like caving over us. They were even like in heart shapes. Like, when you look at the clouds, that's what the trees are doing. And I have never been more in touch with my body ever in my life. Ever in my life. Like it was transcendent. In the like I just I couldn't even explain it if I wanted to. Like how every sense of my body was alive, alert, aware of what was happening. Every sense was also in gratitude of like the community, the connection, the otherworldliness that we were able to access. Um, so that has been, when if I start the story with something that, um, you know, unfortunate,
Mm-hmm.
and my story with my body continued to like just have, um, I don't know, ill-fated moments. I am very conscious as a like in any creative work I do not to be like doom led,
Mm-hmm.
um, or trauma anchored.
Mm-hmm.
Things will be trauma informed, but trauma anchored.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the freedom to imagine, the freedom to like breathe, the
Mm-hmm.
freedom to like, as an adult, as a we're all like working people, there's tension that is like embedded in our shoulders and our backs and our spines. To have this like that evaporate is very rare. It's so rare, in our daily lives. And so like even these like small moments where we're able to just like completely let our bodies and our minds and our imagination go uninhibited is such a moment of joy for me. And that inspired the piece. Like,
Mm-hmm.
how do we reclaim our bodies when it feels like there's parts of our bodies that have been, you know, provoked, intruded on. Like, how do we reclaim our bodies? And I find that through that practice, I'm just able to like pivot my attention from like that to like this whole other world to access. And I really appreciate that.
Yeah,
That's
you
beautiful.
you
We got
did
we
jump
got to
right
find the
into one of
forest.
my questions.
See,
Yeah, I know, right? We gotta find a forest.
we got to
No,
find
I
the forest.
think the way that the piece sort of takes this journey, as I mentioned, when it opened up, I was immediately tense, and then by the end, I'm breathing. Like I felt so much levity. And I was going to ask if that was a choice, and you kind of touched on that, like with this idea of not wanting to be trauma anchored. I think that's really important,
Mm-hmm.
and not to discredit like the way that audiences do want catharsis. Like the
Yes.
stories are what they are, but if you can offer some breath, that's very nice.
Yeah. And it's not offering breath for the
Hmm.
sake of balancing a story for me, just for the sake of it. For me, it's offering breath. Like part of accessing imagination is it doesn't have to be this way. Like it can be
Mm.
another way. And like there's always this like question that keeps popping up over the years, like what would we be doing or who would we be if we weren't distracted by having to fix, heal, resolve that like emotional labor of having to like unlearn, undo,
Yes, constantly.
work. It's constant. Um, and it is constant. But like the question of what if, what would we be? What I want to like make, I want to manifest that.
That is
I want to manifest that.
it's that I literally I highlighted this portion of your story where you said I wondered how much I had departed from my own body and what dreams did I have that were never realized, what dreams had I never dared to have. And I'm curious as to what dreams do you dare to realize now with your
Mm.
body, and what dreams do you dare to have now? Like I think that's just a beautiful way of phrasing. Like, I never thought of what do I dare do with my body. Maybe I want to run an ultra marathon. Maybe I want to, learn how to swim. Maybe I want to, like, it's there's that. I think that's such a thought provoking way of putting it.
Mm.
Curious as what you dare to do with your body right now.
Yeah. I think what I dare to do with my body is honor, celebrate, and act on my genius. I dare to do that because I mean, and that's like the opposite of imposter syndrome, right?
Exactly.
It's um, where it's like you have a nail and a hammer, and like it will make you flatten out, and like it will minimize you, it will make you small. Um, and so to recognize our genius, to act on it and honor it and celebrate it, that's like takes such audacity. But it shouldn't, because that's like a God-given gift. Like why is that audacious? Why that shouldn't be audacious, you know? And I think as women of color, as Black women, like um just the world tells us like have some nerve. I dare you to have some nerve,
Hmm.
and as young girls and young humans, we're like, oh, maybe I don't have the nerve, maybe I don't, and uh if I didn't have those layers um from young, that quite like, who would I be? Oh my god, do you know who I would be?
Right, right.
And so part of it is just like, um yeah, I think I'm in a, and I do, maybe this, maybe this is I'm a late bloomer in like, um in like just claiming genius.
Mm,
People have, Toni Morrison blossomed. She wasn't the Toni Morrison we knew
Right.
until her 40s, and so when I'm reminded of like those geniuses, those kinds of geniuses, I'm like, now's the time, you know, to dream the things, imagine the like alternate universe that actually is more accessible to us if only we believed in ourselves. And so I think just in the last few years, I'm realizing, and probably like I really fully contributed to people just being receptive of my creative work. They've Readers and people in craft and release audiences have such an integral role in my confidence to access my genius. So to answer your question, if I what would I dream? What does that look like in practice? Like for me, I think, I named like creative as like this all-encompassing identity. Um, and that's because I think my creativity is not just in harnessing and showcasing my individual creative work. Um, I feel called to do that for other people's creative work. Um, and, I want to create spaces where like like our genius in creativity, our genius in community impact, our genius in like cultural institutions, our genius in entrepreneurship, like all meets. We have these conversations that are so compartmentalized in each of those like four categories.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's the creative community and the artist community. There's the healer community, you
Mm-hmm.
know, the woohoo. There's the, you know, there's the community activists and advocates.
Yes.
Then there's like the entrepreneurs and the people building Black wealth. Like, but why aren't we talking? Like, there's so much intersection, um, and the compartmentalization holds us back from like propelling,
Mm-hmm.
like full propelling. Um, so if I could have a hand in like bringing those like genius minds together and creating spaces for like just like thought and art to like intersect, I want to do that.
Fantastic.
You will.
I think that's a perfect pin in our personal questions, and a great segue into the outro, where we had the conversation cards present at the event, and they had everything to do with the body. We are going to ask you to pick from 1 to 73, any number between 1 and 73, and
This is fun.
Glenn will draw that question, ask it, and that'll be it for the
That's
episode.
dope.
So Chloe, 1
Okay.
through
So
73,
yep.
1 through
Choose
73.
a question. Choose a number. I'm sorry.
Choose a number.
I will choose. I will choose 38. That's my age.
All right, let's go. 38. How do you take care of your body?
Hmm. I let her decide my pace. You know, I mean, anytime I have not like, you know, pushed her more than her capacity, um, it's just come at the expense of myself. Um, so I'm like very proud of like finally getting to a place where I'm letting my body decide my pace for um, just like piling things on, my pace
Mm-hmm.
for what I can, how I process things, you know, and like I've like not being reactive and just like doing the morning pages or taking time to like let some of it just like flush through so that like the there I have more clarity. Um and you know, of course there's like boundaries and saying no. Um and that's really been working for me. That's really been working for me. Just letting my body be more of a decision maker in what I commit to, what I don't. Um yeah. I've been just I've had lots of seasons of being so spread thin and then having nothing left for myself, and that's
Mm-hmm.
not an option anymore. So yeah, just being in partnership with it as I'm make calls on like what to invest in and what not to.
Sure. It's a great
Yeah.
lesson to
Beautiful.
all of us, to be honest.
Whew. And I love referring it to your body as her, however you want to name it. I think it is
Hmm.
an important. It's a beautiful thing. I'm like, man,
Yeah,
am I taking care of her? Which is
her, because we're in
yes,
relationship with our
Yeah.
bodies.
yes.
Because especially if you know what it feels like to be disconnected or like experience disassociation, out of survival or out of just the hecticness of life, you're just going with emotions. And when you have to check yourself, or you know, you have like burnout, you're you it's just you and her in the bed. You're like, I gotta treat you better. She's like,
Mm-hmm.
I gotta treat you better too.
Thank you, Chloe. Such thoughtful,
Thank
phenomenal
you.
answers.
Thank you.
You know, you're part of our community now. You already were, but
You
you know,
stuck with me.
yes, yes, yes. You're stuck with us, and we appreciate you so so
I
much.
appreciate you. Thank you
Thank
both. You guys
you.
like magic. There was magic in that room. And I really don't, I can't equate that experience, even if I were an attendee, to like any other space that I've been in.
Wow.
It was something special in there. And I think part of it is just, it's really, it's really like special when you go into a space and it is nothing but love.
True, true,
Nothing
true,
but
true.
love. Like it completely dismantles the nerves that I had. And I
Wow.
think that speaks to like what you're gathering. Yeah. What and who you're
Yeah.
gathering.
Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much.
Chloe.